Hello and welcome. We are pleased to have people joining from all over the world today in a conversation about treatment and research for people living with progressive MS. We are also going to be hearing about how the International Progressive MS Alliance is doing a lot of work in developing life changing solutions for progressive MS. Today, we will be answering a few questions that we've gathered from all over the world that people have sent to us regarding treatment in progressive MS, as well as the advances that have been made in the field of research for progressive MS. Namaste, my name is Renuka Malakar. I'm joining you from New Delhi, India. I have been a volunteer for the Multiple Sclerosis Society of India for the last 20 years. And currently, I'm the National Secretary in honorary capacity of the Society. I work to ensure that the voice of people living with MS in India reaches the policymakers and the policy implementers, both at the national as well as international level. I've also worked to establish connections with other MS organizations to start a South Asia regional dialogue on multiple sclerosis. My husband was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis in 1998, and I understand the importance of having the latest information on treatment and research. In a minute, I will be introducing you to my terrific panel, but before that, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors and tell you a little bit about the International Progressive MS Alliance. Thank you very much for making this possible for us. The Alliance it has 19 MS organizations, hundreds of researchers, health professionals, the pharmaceutical industry, companies, foundations, donors, and most importantly, people affected and living with MS. In short, the Alliance has brought the world together to solve progressive MS. To date, the Alliance has invested over 24 million euros in research with an overall commitment of 60 million euros through 2025. Well, if you are watching this webcast, then you're likely to know that how important it is to end progressive MS. And that is a very urgent and unmet need. With me today are leading MS experts who are working in bringing life-changing solutions for us, all those who are affected with MS. Well, I'm honored to be actually introducing you to my panel, and I'll start with Dr. Jorge Correale. He is the head of neuroimmunology and demyelinating diseases at the Dr. Raul Carrilla Institute of Neurological Research in Buenos Aires in Argentina. He also serves as an assistant professor of neurology and assistant professor of microbiology and molecular immunology at the University of Southern California. His major research interests are in neuroimmunology, demyelinating diseases, and glial cell biology. He has authored more than 100 papers and written over 30 chapters in the books of MS and neuroimmunology. We also have with us Dr. Emma Gray, who is the Assistant Director of Research at the MS Society in the United Kingdom. She leads the strategic development of the MS Society's board research program, including the UK MS Register, MS Society Tissue Bank, Transnational Centers of Excellence, and an innovative clinical trials program. She has also the responsibility for the patient public involvement and research communications programs. Before joining the MS Society in 2012, she gained a PhD in molecular neuroscience and worked as a postdoctoral researcher at King's College London. And finally, our equally eminent panelist is Dr. Anthony Feinstein, and he is the professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto and runs the neuropsychiatry program at Sunnybrook's Health Sciences Center. He runs a clinical service and research team focusing on the neuropsychiatric changes that commonly occur in people with multiple sclerosis. He is also a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of the International Progressive MS Alliance. His current MS-related research focuses on addressing cognitive challenges that people experience. Dr. Feinstein is an author of over 250 MS-related publications and the Clinical Neuropsychiatry of Multiple Sclerosis Journal. Thank you all for joining me today. Let's get started. Over the last 1 year, we have received hundreds of questions from all over the world regarding treatment and research in progressive MS. Today, we are going to try and answer and cover the frequently asked questions. I'd like to start with a question from a person living with MS in Australia and have each one of you answer it. So basically, they ask that with the global pandemic, the last year has been very tough for everyone and especially so for people with progressive MS. Can you all share an advance in research or treatment in the last year that can give hope to the people? Let's start with Dr. Coriali. Dr. Coriali, how hopeful and what hopeful news can you share with us today?
Thank you, Renuka, for your kind introduction. Regarding the question, we every time have hope. We have hope for our patients with progressive MS, and I think one of the best situations during these years is that the Progressive MS Alliance put progressive MS in the center of our research and our future treatment. Regarding the question is that, first of all, we need to understand better what is happening with progressive MS. So in the past, we believe that progressive MS starts very late in the age, and now we know that it started at the very beginning. If we understand how is the advance of the progressive MS, we can prevent the progression. And if we can prevent the progression, we can treat the patient early, this will be a good option. And the other point is if we can understand how to start the disease, how we can to prevent. The next step will be how to repair this problem. And in the last couple of years, we had huge advance to understand how is developed MS, progressive MS. We have some kind of treatment that have a moderate effect, but we have hope that in the future, we will have new treatment for patients with primary progressive and with secondary progressive MS. These will be neuroprotective drugs and will be remyelinating drugs, probably. But this is a problem for many other diseases. And so probably in other neurodegenerative diseases, we will have the same problem and the same situation. And then we use together the same effort together with people with Parkinson's disease, with Alzheimer's disease, with ALS, probably we can join a solution or a better quality of life. That this is probably the more important final point in our patients for progressive MS patients.
Right, thank you so much. Dr. Gray, what progress do you find hopeful?
Thanks, Ranucca, and hello to everyone watching. I mean, it really has been a difficult year, hasn't it? So I'll give some specific answers, but for me, fundamentally, what's given me hope over the last 18 months is the way that the community has really shown, the research community has shown resilience and continue to deliver, groundbreaking clinical and basic research and innovative, and they've adapted in adapted ways. So this gives me hope. But actually, if I could pick a couple of examples of research to answer the question. One is I'd highlight a myelin repair remyelination clinical trial of a drug called bexarotene, which was previously used in cancer. And the results came out towards the end of last year. Unfortunately, bexarotene has got some quite serious side effects, so won't be taken forward for development. But the trial did show good evidence of remyelination in people with MS, which I think is super encouraging. So, and the team behind the study will take that learning forward into another trial using a similar methodology, which will look at a combination of metformin, a diabetes drug, and clemastine, an antihistamine that we know has already shown some potential to remyelinate, and see whether together they can boost this effect and show remyelination again. So that, the fact that we're making progress there gives me some hope. And another really interesting piece of research that was published last year, led by Dr. Don Mahad in Edinburgh, who's actually received Alliance funding in the past, showed that a novel mechanism or a way we can potentially protect nerves from damage. And he showed that nerves respond to myelin damage by increasing the movement of energy-producing mitochondria to that area of damage. And he showed in his laboratory studies that this could be enhanced using an existing drug. So this will be developed further, and that's really exciting progress as well.
Well, thank you. And even though I'm a layperson and not a medical expert, this does give me a lot of hope, like it would give to so many people hearing. It's very hopeful. And Professor Feinstein, what's the advance that you would like to highlight?
So thank you for the warm introduction. I'm very pleased to see that there is now a strong focus on behavioral difficulties linked to people with multiple sclerosis, and in particular cognitive problems. We know that cognitive difficulties are common in people with MS, and when you get towards the progressive phase of the disease, the problems are very common. You can have rates of impairment of up to 70, 80, or 90% in people with progressive multiple sclerosis. And what we're starting to see now are some promising results that are coming out of cognitive rehabilitation studies. So up until now, it was thought that if you have cognitive problems, there's not a whole lot you can do about them. But through cognitive rehab, you can actually see some improvement in things like memory, processing speed, and executive functioning. And one of the developments that I find exciting is that there are now computerized programs that are being developed in which you can administer cognitive rehabilitation through a computer. And you're able to choose a particular model that fits a person in terms of their current level of cognitive disability, and in a graduated fashion, potentially push them along or build them up so that you can begin to see some cognitive improvement. I believe that the ultimate aim of something like this, of course, is to get rehabilitation into the home. So not have the individual come into a clinic for rehabilitation, but to provide this kind of intervention in a person's home. And I believe through computers and the development of computer-based programs, it's probably going to be possible down the road that you'll be able to administer cognitive rehab to an individual in their home. And when you think about progressive MS with the advanced physical disability, I think this is potentially a very significant improvement.
Thank you. I really think it's going to be very significant. And again, like I said, cognitive impairment or cognitive difficulty is something which we also here in India are finding with so many of our MS persons. This could be a great way, and bringing it back into your home is very hopeful. It's very hope generating, So thank you for giving me that, giving us all that information. So I'm going to move on to the next set of questions. And, what we have received is that a lot of questions related to the pandemic, which we received, and it was mainly regarding the COVID-19 vaccine and and should people with MS take it. And there is one question that we have got from an individual in Spain, and the person says that should people with MS have concerns about getting the vaccine, and where should I go to get reliable information about this? Dr. Coriali, what advice are you giving people regarding the vaccine, and what would be a good source for them to go to get this kind of information?
Well, first of all people with MS must be vaccinated. Again, must be vaccinated. The risk to have COVID is significantly higher than the potential minimum side effects that can produce the vaccine. So fever, muscle pain, or any other small symptoms are very little compared with the problem that COVID can produce in an MS patient, particularly in a progressive MS patient with low mobility. So all people with MS should be vaccinated, and even if they have COVID before. So COVID is not an exclusion criteria to be vaccinated. You can find good information. We are working very hard in the National MS Society in the United States, together with Brenda Banwell. We are part of this group, and we are part also of the MSIF group. So we are trying to use the same information for both groups, of course with some adaptations, because the MSIF have a work association with different kind of vaccines, but we're trying to have a clear message for all the patients, and you can find very good information in the pages of the National MS Society in the United States, and you can find very good information in the pages of the MSIF in many different languages.
Thank you, that's very helpful. So you said the National MS Society website as well as the MSIF, which is MS International Federation. Perfect, thank you. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about managing symptoms. So managing symptoms in progressive MS, everyone knows is very, very challenging, and not surprising that most of the questions have come regarding this. And, you know, one of the symptoms which has really taken over is the question on fatigue. And there's been considerable amount of questions being asked about that. So I'm going to read out a question from a person with MS in Iceland, who says, very interestingly, that because of this fatigue, every day is like a roller coaster for me. What can I do to help with fatigue? Professor Feinstein, can you weigh in a little bit on this and on this question on how to help with fatigue?
So certainly fatigue is a very significant challenge for people with multiple sclerosis, and the treatment can be difficult as well. There are a number of medications that can be tried for fatigue. These are generally stimulant medications. They include drugs such as methylphenidate, which you have a short-acting or a long-acting form. One of the advantages to long-acting treatment is that you take the medication in the morning and it remains in the system throughout the day, but it's gone by the evening so that you don't have difficulty falling asleep. There are other anti-fatigue medications like modafinil. Amantadine, the antiviral medication, also has some anti-fatigue properties. At the more extreme end of the medication spectrum, you can use amphetamine derivatives, which are stimulant medications which potentially can give you some energy. And interestingly enough, there was also some data from the drug fampiridine, which is given to individuals with MS to help them with their walking, to suggest that this might also have some benefits with respect to fatigue. So there's a whole panoply of medications. But should the medications not work, there's an emerging literature suggesting that cognitive behavior therapy may also have some benefits with respect to fatigue. by helping the individual correct some of their thoughts about tiredness, about fatigue, by using CBT to bring about some lifestyle changes as well that can help an individual deal with this very difficult clinical challenge.
So there's another area that I was hoping that you would address, Professor Feinstein. The other big topic on symptom management that people are asking is cognition, which you mentioned a little earlier. There's a person from Brazil who's asked, do yoga, Pilates, and any kind of physical exercise help to improve cognitive abilities? And what else could help? So from your learnings and from what you have seen in your research, Professor Feinstein, could you shed some light on this?
Right. So there is now a lot of attention on exercise as a potential treatment for cognitive difficulties. I'm currently leading a large international study across 11 centers, Canada, the United States, England, Italy, Denmark, and Belgium, looking at whether aerobic exercise can improve cognitive difficulties in people with progressive MS, secondary and primary progressive MS. And we have a very vigorous exercise regime in which we encourage people to come into the clinic and go through a program of aerobic exercise. 24 sessions are given over a 3-month period, and we gradually increase the complexity or the severity of the exercise, building a person's aerobic capacity. And the primary aim of it is to see whether we can bring about improvement in cognition, in particular processing speed. And this study is based on a literature that suggests exercise can indeed help cognition, not just for people with multiple sclerosis, but across the board, even for individuals with an Alzheimer type dementia or people with mild cognitive impairment. There's a growing literature to suggest that exercise might indeed be helpful over here. We're also combining our exercise with cognitive rehabilitation. So we're trying to look for a synergistic effect in which we're giving 2 therapies concurrently to people with progressive MS, a tailored exercise program according to their abilities, plus cognitive rehab at the same time, with the aim of seeing whether we can indeed bring about cognitive improvement. So that study is going to wrap up in about a year's time. But not to delay hope. I think there's a cautious sense of optimism that exercise may indeed have benefits from a cognitive perspective.
So I know what I'm going to look out for, what to read in the coming year. Anyway, so let's move on to another aspect. Maintaining mobility is high priority for people with progressive MS. A person from Italy actually asks that, what should I do to maintain my strength and mobility as my MS progresses? Dr. Coriali, what can people do to maintain and improve their mobility?
Well, in addition to the treatment that we can have, particularly for the disease or for the symptoms of the disease, the physical therapy is extremely important in patients with progressive MS. So physical therapy must be a parallel treatment to any other kind of treatment that we have with the progressive MS, not only to increase strength and to improve the mobility, but also to improve the balance, to improve the spasticity, and to prevent some secondary complications like muscle atrophy. And in addition, as Professor Feinstein mentioned, they will increase the optimism of these patients. And I'm very sure, if the patient can keep the mobility, can keep the motility, can walk much better, the quality of life of this patient will be much better than before.
So I just had one clarification. When you say physical therapy, is it the same as physiotherapy, or?
It's a physiotherapy. Sometimes you can have therapy, occupational therapy also, in addition to this, to improve how the patient do the daily life activities, or how the patient can save energy to improve the problem of the fatigue. that Dr. Feinstein developed before. So the question of the physical therapy and the occupational therapy are two important players in the team to recover these patients.
Right, right. There are two more topics that I'm hoping we can cover in the symptom management, which is depression and pain management. Here's a question from United Kingdom who says that depression has recently become a big part of my progressive MS. Any advice on how to manage would be gratefully received. So Professor Feinstein, how can people who are experiencing depression feel relief, or what's your advice for people to get relief from depression?
So depression is very common in people with multiple sclerosis, and the data suggests that 1 in 2 individuals with MS will develop a clinically significant depression over the course of their lifetime. The treatments can be divided into 2 broad categories. One is medication, so antidepressant medication. And there's some evidence that you may want to tailor the drug according to the kind of depression. For example, if you have depression with a lot of pain, the medication may be duloxetine. If you have depression associated with insomnia, that's a problem. You may want to use a drug like mirtazapine, which is more sedating. If depression comes with fatigue, perhaps then a medication like fluoxetine, which is slightly activating. So you have a choice of medications to try. But the other big treatment modality is something that I've mentioned already, cognitive behavior therapy. And the American Academy of Neurology, in a position paper, consensus paper, recommends cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, as a treatment of choice for people with multiple sclerosis. One of the advantages of the talk therapies or the psychotherapies is that it does not come with side effects. I always joke that if you get side effects from CBT, you should change your therapist. But CBT is an effective way of dealing with depression, and there's good empirical data that it can help people with multiple sclerosis. If you don't have access to a CBT therapist, you may want to try medications which could help you as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There's another question from a person from Morocco about pain. Pain in MS seems unrecognized. Is there any research about pain and MS? Dr. Gray, is there research on pain and MS? What are the learnings, if there is?
Yeah, I mean, pain is a really common symptom of MS. I think we think up to about 80% of people experience it, and I guess it's a hidden symptom, so you can't always tell by looking at somebody if they're in pain or not. And I think and it's often hard to describe, so I think it makes it really hard for people to get the acknowledgement and the treatment that they need. It's a complicated symptom, and it's managed by a range and often combination of things, such as medicines, including drugs, physical interventions like massage, physiotherapy, acupuncture, relaxation techniques, and even surgery. And that's obviously always something to be discussed with your healthcare professional. But in terms of research, a lot of pain and MS recent research has kind of focused on gaining, I guess, a better understanding of the prevalence of different types of pain in people with MS. And research has often been quite small, the numbers, but generally kind of what we think is that the most common type of pain is musculoskeletal pain. So that's pain that you might feel in your muscles, your bones, ligaments, tendons, and then also neuropathic pain, which is caused by a damage directly to the nervous system. And people often describe it as a burning sensation or kind of skin sensitive to touch. So these are the most common types. In terms of treatment research, there are lots of avenues being explored beyond drug treatment. And one area that you're hearing repeatedly tonight for me in the UK, is cognitive behavioural therapy. And again, this is being trialled for pain, and some recent studies have shown it can reduce the severity of pain. And there are some other sort of neuromodulatory type techniques, such as TENS, which is often used in pregnancy and labour, where sort of small electrical impulses can be delivered to the area of the body. It can reduce the signals of pain, go into the brain and the spinal cord, and help relieve pain, relax muscles. So there are lots of different areas that are being investigated at the moment.
Yeah, and pain is something which you rightly said is unrecognized, and a lot of time people who experience pain are told that nobody understands. They think I'm just faking it, and I'm just making an excuse. So yeah, this is also something which I'm sure is a great learning for all of us here. Let's move on to another area of current treatments in progressive MS. This is a multiple part question from United States, and I'll try and so they're asking, are there any effective treatments for people with progressive MS? I keep on hearing about treatments for people with active secondary progressive MS. What does active mean? And why are there some treatments only specifically approved for the active forms? Can you help me break this down, Dr. Coriali? First, are there currently any effective treatments for people with progressive MS?
Well, we have two different treatments now approved for progressive MS. One for primary progressive MS that is called ocrelizumab, and this drug can reduce the progression of the disease. Another drug that is recently approved for secondary progressive MS is called siponimod. Siponimod also reduces the speed of the progression of the disease, but for secondary progressive patients. Unfortunately, the approval of these drugs was only for people that have active secondary progressive MS, and not for all the secondary progressive MS patients. What does mean active MS, secondary progressive MS, is that in the top of the progression, the patient might have either a new attack or have evidence in the MRI that have activity of the disease. If the patient have activity of the disease, for example, new T2 lesions or new gadolinium-enhanced lesions, or have a new attack, this is considered an active patient. And in this patient, FDA and most of the regulatory agencies approve the use of siponimod. Not in the patient that have secondary progressive without activity. This is a situation that still we need to solve, because we still have a significant number of patients that have no activity, but have progression of the disease. And we need to give you an answer to these patients. Fortunately, there is a number of studies trying to investigate different drugs that probably were used before for other indications. This will help if we can use this drug for secondary progressive or for primary progressive patients, because the possibility of the clinical trial will be faster. We don't need to do too much preclinical study. We don't need to do too much or too long a phase 2 clinical trials. So the idea is try to repropose new drugs that were used before for other indications to treat these patients. But now approval are only ocrelizumab for primary progressive patients and siponimod for secondary patients with activity.
Thank you. What I picked up also from what you mentioned is that it becomes faster. Research needs to be fast, which actually brings me to the next question, which is what we are hearing. A lot of people are asking us that what the future holds in terms of developing new therapies and new effective treatments. Dr. Gray, here's a question on the challenges of clinical trials in progressive MS. An individual from Canada has asked, why do clinical trials of new drugs take so long? People with MS can't wait for years and years. Can't something be done to make this faster in the future?
Clinical trials are incredibly frustrating and slow. Everyone will agree there. Accelerating clinical trials is a top priority area for the Alliance. But it has to be considered. Trials have to be rigorous, and we have to ensure a treatment is safe and effective for someone to take. And often this can take time. But there are ways, and as an Alliance and as an international research community, we're trying to speed things up. So I can give you some examples of where we can try and speed things up. So firstly, if you consider outcome measures, so these are the measurements that we take in a trial to see if a drug is working. So in reality, although it may not feel that way to somebody, progression happens actually relatively slowly. So it could take several years to confirm progression in a trial. So in the early phase 2 progressive trials, we're trying to find, I guess, the quickest answer to whether a potential treatment is working. So we're looking for things that you can measure, biological changes that you can measure, that you can attribute to progression, like, well, how quickly can you deploy an MRI brain atrophy scan? Or can you look at blood samples to measure neurofilaments to see which are markers of damage? So how quickly can we do these, and how reliably can we use them to tell us whether a drug is worth developing? So we're speeding things up by looking at those outcome measures, and the Alliance is doing a lot of work in that area. If you look at the larger phase 3 definitive trials, where we have to, medicine regulators instruct us to use clinical outcomes, EDSS, which is essentially a walking scale, we're trying to find measures that are more sensitive, or combining measurements to see if we can get to answers quicker. So we're looking at those measures. There's a couple of other things to mention. The actual design of the trials itself. We're learning a lot from fields like oncology and even the COVID trials about how you can run more, I guess, flexible or adaptive design. So the idea of testing several drugs at once, as opposed to concurrently, as opposed to doing them, instead of doing trials separately, you run them all concurrently at the same time. Using early measurements as soon as you can to see if a drug is not worth pursuing, and then you can remove it from the trial, replace it with another one. And combining actual trial stages themselves to remove that kind of setup and shutdown stage at the end of each trial phase that loses us several years in the process. So there's been a lot of thought going into this. And in the UK, we're actually setting up a large progressive MS trial called Octopus that's trying to test all these principles, and we hope that ultimately it could be used beyond the UK. And then the final thing I'd mention is the drug selection itself. So we can use repurposed or repositioned drugs that already exist for other conditions. So we already know, I guess, a lot about their safety in people. It might not be people with MS, but we know a lot about their safety. So that can, I guess, reduce the amount of years we can spend on, testing the safety of them. So there are ways that we are doing that. And I think the global community really realised this is a priority for us to tackle, and we are making progress there. So that was a long answer, and I hope it was helpful.
Yes, and it does give a lot of clarity on how to speed up, what to do, what are the challenges. Yeah, and so we are going to, this is a very interesting section where we have received some questions about myelin repair and current research. A person from Denmark, for instance, has asked, remyelination, do you even think this is possible? Dr. Coriali, when we were speaking earlier, you did mention. So the question that I would like you to give some insights on is remyelination possible, and is progress being achieved in the research?
Well, it's a challenging point. Probably is one of the more challenging issues that we have in the repair of the MS. But there are some research going on, some drugs that were tested and unfortunately didn't go very well. But we have other going on, some other that are in development, and we have a number of situations that we need to address. First of all, what is a drug that will be responsible for remyelination? And the other important point is how we can measure this remyelination in the proper way, because this is also something that we need to address. But we feel, again, with some good expectations that will be in the future the possibility to remyelinate this nerve. We don't know if we will have a normal myelin. We don't know if we will have a real good myelin, but we can start to have a repair of the damage that we produce. Will be no easier, will be no in the next year, will be no problem in the next 2 years, but we are thinking about this in many different aspects.
Right. The other question is also regarding the treatment of progressive MS. The most frequently asked questions were about slowing and stopping progression. A person from Kenya, for instance, is also asked, are there any new treatments on the horizon for people like me with progressive MS? Dr. Coriali, what is on the horizon in terms of new treatments for progressive MS?
Well, as we mentioned before, the both drug ocrelizumab and siponimod, the main effect is to slow down the speed of the progression of the disease. Of course, the effect is modest, is not as good as we would like, but this the first step. Is like we 20 or 25 years ago, we have interferon for relapsing remitting patient, and at this point the effect was modest. But after that, we have today 14 or 16 different drugs for relapsing remitting patients. We hope that this will be a start point to have more effective drugs. And indeed, there are many other drugs, as Emma mentioned, that are testing in different ways to try to accelerate the approval of these drugs to decrease the speed of the progression or to be used as a neuroprotector drugs, like I mentioned before, in other neurodegenerative diseases.
Mm-hmm. Right. I have learned a lot from my interaction with you all, and I hope the others have also. Well, we are almost nearing the end of our webcast, and we've got a few minutes. So this question is a final question that I'm going to ask as a wife of someone with primary progressive MS. You know, the Alliance's promise is more than hope, progress. What inspires you about the progress being made or achieved by the Alliance to accelerate the development of life-changing solutions? And I'd like to pose this question to Professor Feinstein. I would like to ask you, what really inspires you in this area?
Well, thank you. There are many things that inspire me. I'm actually inspired by my patients with MS. I'm always impressed how they volunteer for studies, that they come in for difficult rehabilitation studies that involve multiple visits to my center. They come in whether it's snowing outside or whether it's really hot. So there's an inspiration that I get from people with MS. I also take a lot of hope from the Progressive MS Alliance, which is this unique collection of so many talented, skilled individuals with a vast knowledge of multiple sclerosis. And I think, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, you've got this collective expertise in one place, all, you know, working for the same goal. And that, you know, that's pretty unique as well. And so you're already starting to see the benefits of these collaborations. And, you know, for my area, this intense focus on symptom management is so important, because when you've got a disease for which there's no cure, you make it manageable through good symptom management. And, you know, from the behavioral aspects of multiple sclerosis, now we know there are some good treatments. You know, depression can be helped. We're starting to see evidence that you can potentially improve cognitive difficulties. We haven't even spoken about anxiety, but there's some effective treatments for anxiety. And so there's a strong focus now on these aspects of multiple sclerosis, which are so pivotal to a person's quality of life. And so this is an interesting and exciting time to be involved in MS research.
Just hearing you all, I feel inspired, and, you know, may God bless all those people who are participating and coming forward to participate in the trials and research, because they would not know how many people's lives they are going to change in a positive way. So, you know, it's been very, very informative, and thank you very much. But what we did today was we tried to answer some of the leading questions regarding MS treatment and research. And for all of you who are seeing and watching this in the future webcasts, we will work on more areas, as this, we all know, MS is a complex disease with many, many facets, and it's just not possible to cover everything on one webcast. I hope that you all have experienced that the Alliance has the best people working together to find solutions, to address the challenges and come up with life-changing treatments for people living with MS and with progressive MS. The International Progressive MS Alliance is rallying the world, rallying worldwide to get MS community, and is also supporting and fueling research to get effective treatments for people who really need them. The Alliance continues to inspire hope and make progress. And of course, there is no going away from the fact that we must and will continue to do much more, because there is so much more to do. Thank you to our panel of speakers, Dr. Coriali, Dr. Emma Gray, Dr. Anthony Feinstein. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time and bringing so much information. I want to thank all of you watching the webcast and joining us today. Please do stay connected with the Alliance through our regular webcasts and through your MS organizations. Please do share what you learned today about the MS Alliance work with everyone within your networks. And we need so many more people to join this and make it even larger. And I will end with a very powerful line, it resonates with me. Together, we are stronger than progressive MS. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you.